Welcome to the Money Mile Podcast. I am your host, Justin Waller, and I'm happy you are here. We like to think of Money Mile as standing at the corner of triathlon and personal finance. We believe that age group triathletes are the lifeblood of our sport, and we want to shine the light on some good people doing great things in our sport. Today, we are going to have our Questions on Course segment and a new guest to the show. Today, we are joined by Michele Cellai. Michele is a triathlete and nurse practitioner on the East Coast, so stick around to hear more about her story after we discuss our Questions on Course. The question on course for today is, when is the best time to purchase long-term care insurance? There has been lots of information around over the last several years about long-term care insurance, and ultimately I think that all people should have a plan if they needed long-term care, but not everybody needs to have long-term care insurance. And I'll share with you a little bit more about what I mean by that. If you happen to have $42 million in your resources and you were looking at a long-term care potential scenario, average cost that we plan for around long-term care is somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000, depending upon where you're living and the type of care that you would like to receive. That's the norm. If you happen to have a history of memory care issues instead of just a physical need for long-term care, there can be a significant difference there. So to dig in on that, long-term care is essentially having someone come out to your home to help provide assistance when needed. And it kind of falls into two categories in my mind, one of which is a physical care need. A common example that most people can relate to is I've fallen and I broke my hip and the doctor's saying it's going to take at least 6 months for me to fully recover. So I'd like to be able to stay at home for a lot of that, but I'm going to need somebody to come out to the house and help me is one scenario. Or if I don't have other support at home, I'm going to need to go somewhere for a number of months and get rehab and get back quite literally on my feet and then be able to go home. So that's the physical side of long-term care. There's also a growing concern around the mental side of long-term care. And in particular, the primary culprits here, if you will, are Alzheimer's and dementia. In these scenarios, physically, you are fine, but mentally, the mental component is where the challenge presents itself, in which case those care scenarios can last for a decade, and the need for care is more, in my opinion, is a bit more acute, dealing with memory care facilities and things of that nature, because you're dealing with someone that could significantly harm themselves if left to their own devices, wandering out into traffic, heaven forbid, or something like that. They could do a lot of damage to themselves. So they require a different type of day-to-day support than someone who just needs some help getting up and getting around on the day-to-day as their hip is healing. So expenses for those cognitive decline scenarios like Alzheimer's and dementia can be significantly higher, and the care needs tend to be significantly longer than someone recovering from a broken hip or something like that. So the cost of care can be significant if you're looking at one of those scenarios. The average cost of care, and we'll have a link in the show notes to a Genworth tool. Genworth is one of the largest long-term care insurers in the country, and they have a tool that you can utilize to check the average cost of care in your area, so you can kind of see what's going on there. Once you understand what the risks are, and we're on the base case, we're talking somewhere between $250,000 and call it $350,000 as an example. Long-term care insurance is a strategy. If you happen to have $42 million in the bank, you don't necessarily need to have long-term care insurance because you can self-insure. Some people might still opt for some degree of long-term care insurance if they want to do that, and that's fine, or just essentially renting access to an additional pool of money just in case they need it. If they sleep better at night having that, even though they might have $42 million in the bank, that's fine too. I do think that it's important for most people, especially as they reach age 50, to start having this conversation. And kind of to the question being asked, I think you should start having a strategy around age 50. You should be developing that strategy. And by age 60, the reality is that long-term care insurance begins getting so expensive that you essentially get priced out of that as a strategy for a lot of clients. So between 50 and 60 is when you should be developing that strategy and understand that self-insurance is a strategy. There are pros and cons to that you need to be aware of, but it's no different than the pros and cons of having an insurance policy. The example that I use here is if you bought a long-term care insurance policy that has a total benefit of $300,000, once that benefit is gone, it goes back to you to pay the bills. So very similar as if you had $300,000 worth of home equity and your strategy was to use that to pay the bills. Once that's gone, it's gone. So we have similar risk in that. We also look at the overall structure of your resources and your income when we're thinking about the planning scenario, recognizing that if you happen to have a significant pension or something of that nature, or you have a meaningful Social Security payment, if you are receiving care, you're probably not traveling the world and going on scuba diving vacations or whatever it might be. You might not be doing those same things. So your income can be spent differently rather than necessarily saying, I've got an additional $6,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 a month of care expenses. The money that you have coming in will probably be reallocated because you're not going to be living the same lifestyle that you would have lived otherwise. My hope is that this has been a valuable conversation for you around when you should be considering long-term care. The ultimate recommendation is that you need to have a strategy in place starting around age 50, and by age 60, you need to have decided on how you want to approach things. Consider self-insurance as a viable strategy there. Statistically speaking, 1 out of every 2 people are going to need long-term care at some level. So as we look at that, that means half of the listeners will have an event that need it, and the other half will not. There's no way to know exactly for sure which half of that you're going to be in. And I wish for all of the folks in this group to never need long-term care and to never be in that situation, but we do need to plan appropriately for that. So it is a legitimate concern, is a significant risk that many retirees face. Pay attention to that, address it with your eyes open, have a strategy. And once you've decided on a strategy, live your life. Don't live in fear of long-term care. Once you have decided on a strategy and how you're going to handle it, you want to do the best you can to take care of your body and take care of your mind and improve your odds of not needing that care. But don't live in fear of it either, and make sure that you're living the best life you can now. So I hope that was valuable for you. I hope that answers the question. And if I didn't address the particular nuances of that question, please feel free to reach out to us at info@wallerfc.com. Happy to dig in on that further. And now let's turn our attention to Michele Cellai. Michele is a triathlete and nurse practitioner in adult primary care at an academic center. She focuses on health and wellness in her practice and is also working on her certification in lifestyle medicine. Michele, welcome to Money Mile.
Thank you, Justin. So nice to be here.
Michele, if we are doing this correctly, our listeners are out there somewhere on their long, steady run. So any links or anything like that you'd like to reference, we'll include in the show notes so our listeners can follow that information up later. Is that okay with you?
Sure, that's totally fine.
All right. So I was hoping you could just start us off and tell us a little bit about how you got started in triathlon.
I think I'm the quintessential Gen X triathlete in that I lived in a small town in New York, probably in 60 or so miles north of New York City. When cable came to town in the early 80s, I spent a lot of time flipping through all those new channels, came across Ironman and saw the Julie Moss finish. And don't ask me why that made me say, I'm going to do that someday. But it did, just like a lot of people. And it wasn't until 1994 when I actually started racing triathlon. But I still remember that being I'm going to do that someday.
That's interesting that you share that experience because I recall a similar experience watching that and thinking, oh my gosh, why would anybody do that to themselves? So a little bit different experience, similar end result, but so glad that you got involved with the sport and have been participating, obviously, in a sport you love for quite a while. So can you tell us a little bit more about your professional practice? You're a nurse practitioner and you're studying or working on a certification for lifestyle medicine. And I'm kind of unfamiliar with what that is. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so lifestyle medicine is using health and wellness food as medicine, exercise as medicine. And so treating the chronic diseases of lifestyle, whether that's diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and even some types of cancers, but not all, by having a whole food, plant-based, mostly, diet and a regular exercise regimen, mindfulness, sleep. So it really encompasses quite a few different concepts that we use in healthcare. And so I believe it's the healthcare of the future.
It sounds like well beyond the traditional Western medicine aspect of, oh, hey, you've got X, Y, and Z. Here's a prescription or here's a treatment program that you need to follow. Looking, it sounds like much more holistically at the overall body as a cohesive unit and how can we live better as a result of that.
I'm in a standard academic practice, so I do prescribe medication. But for the people that come in and they really don't want to take pills, they really do want to change their life, this is the way to be healthy, is to look at everything that you do on a daily basis in terms of what am I choosing to eat? What am I buying at the grocery store? What's the best way for me to get the most sleep? How can I fit activity into my day when I have, kids to raise and I have a full-time job and I have a commute? So thinking about all those things and incorporating more physical activity, not necessarily prescribed exercise for some people, but being more active throughout your day.
Well, and you obviously have an interesting perspective and a unique perspective on increasing physical activity in the span of a day. As a long-term triathlete, I'm sure you bring a lot of benefits to the table, a lot of perspective with your patients. So we'll look forward to hearing more about how that evolves in your world. I know that you have been doing triathlon for quite a while, and I'm also curious about how you are defining success these days.
When I started in triathlon, I was, mostly interested in enjoying the process, seeing other people out there during the race that were similar mindset, which of course helps somewhat keep you motivated during training. I never was a person that was going to podium at a big event. I have, and even recently podiumed at small local events, which I completely enjoy. But what does success look like in the bigger picture? Being injury free as much as possible. So I've twice now. So in 2013, and I tore the meniscus in my right knee. 23, tore the meniscus in my left knee. So making sure that I got the proper rehab. I didn't try to go it alone or ignore it. I went and got proper evaluation, and I opted for non-surgical both times. And in 2013, it took me 6 months to get back to full training. In 2023, it took me 15 months to get back to full training. So yeah, 10 years on, it was a longer process, but I was patient. I did what my physical therapist recommended. I kept up my strength training. I, of course, kept up swimming and cycling since those didn't bother the knee. And I really look at success as being as longevity in the practice of triathlon, and really being able to enjoy it. I don't want to be one of those people that says I had to give it up because of my knees. And I don't think you have to. I think you have to be patient, and you have to be mindful of the fact that, yes, things may happen, but there are options out there.
The fact that you were able to recover with a non-surgical option is great. It's an interesting example of how things change over time. We need to be aware of our bodies and recognize that as we age up in the age groups, it might take us a little bit longer for recovery. So we're no longer our 19 or 22-year-old selves that can bounce back the same way that we did. So we also recognize that triathlon can be an expensive hobby. I'm curious of what tips or suggestions you might have for triathletes to get the best bang for their buck from a financial perspective.
Obviously, with triathlon, there's two big costs. There's the bike, and there is the race event itself. I subscribed to the theory that I don't really need to get rid of anything until it breaks. Hence, I had bought my first true triathlon bike in 2008. Prior to that, I had road bikes with aero bars that I put on. But when I was going to do my first full iron distance race, I decided I should have a proper bike. And I saved the money, I did the research, and I got a proper bike. And I kept that bike for 15 years. I will say that at races, it's the engine, not the bike. But when that bike did break in August of 2023, and it was irreparable, it was a frame crack. I did go out and I got, a brand new Quintana Roo XPR. And I can honestly admit that I am 1 to 2 miles per hour faster on the new bike. So there is a little bit to the bike. And I don't think you should not consider a used bike. The technology does change, and I waited an extreme amount of time between getting new bikes. I don't think you need to change your bike every 2 years, as some people do. I think you can get a bike that's 3 or 4 years old at a very good price, and it will do you very well for several years.
And I think that's great perspective in recognizing that there is a balance to be had there. If you're trying to be, top of the podium at, Ironman World Championships, yeah, you're probably going to need to look at every minute possible bit. But if you happen to be, and I'll speak for myself here, if you happen to be in a similar situation to me where you have zero hope of ever being on any podium anywhere, personally, I enjoy the training more than the racing, but I have to have a race on the schedule or I won't do the training right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're in the same boat.
Part two of that answer, I just want to say is I do believe we should support small independent race companies. We all know the big company that's out there, and they do put on a fantastic race with a lot of amenities, but they wouldn't be where they are if they hadn't purchased the smaller companies through the years. And there are still people at small companies producing really fantastic races. As I said, I've done 2 local races or local to the East Coast where I just drove, and they were really well put on. They even had, some swag, and I think it's very much worth looking at your smaller race companies and doing those races. They are cheaper as well, and you'll get recognition out there. People will recognize you if you're good.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Would it be okay with you if you kind of gave a shout out to the small local races that you're talking about? We'd love to get them some press. If there are other folks in the area that might be interested in doing those races, I'd love to get some additional eyeballs on those races, if that's okay.
Sure. Within the state of Georgia, there is Try the Parks, where they have multiple triathlons through the season throughout the state at different state parks. The one I particularly did was the Rock and Roll Half Triathlon in Macon earlier, I guess it was October. And then I went to South Carolina and I did what's called the Edisto Triathlon. That was also a half. Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. Macon was an Olympic. The Rock and Roll Triathlon in Macon was an Olympic. And then Edisto was the half triathlon.
So I think that's really beneficial for our audience to be aware of. A lot of times when people get involved with triathlon, it gets this reputation of like Ironman or nothing. Like if it doesn't have the M.Dot, and I have no affiliation with Ironman, I'm a big fan of their work too. But a lot of people get the perspective that it's M.Dot or nothing. And I think there are a lot of really great races out there that you don't have to necessarily have that M.Dot experience for every triathlon you do. I do think that if you want to be a triathlon for life, checking that box at least once and having that experience is good, but you don't have to do it every month or every year. I think there are a lot of great local races out there as well. And I'm really glad you're highlighting that. The Georgia State Parks races, like that sounds super interesting to me. I would love to do that. If I'm ever closer to Georgia, I will figure that out. Now, related to the races that you have been doing, you had a great race at the Chattanooga 70.3 this year, improving your finish time from last year by an entire hour. Did I get that right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that sounds incredible to me. Can you tell us how you trained for that race this year and what you might have done differently this year that was different than the year prior?
So as I mentioned, I had a meniscus tear in 2023 and I could do no run training. But fast forward to the day of the race, and for some reason, I thought I could trot through the run course. And so I was out there sort of trotting along literally. It was still very slow. But when I got to mile 8.5 or so, my legs were like, we have not done anything like this. We're done. And so I walked the last 4 miles or so of the run course. And of course, the bike was on the old bike, and it's a beautiful bike course. So this year, of course, I was back to my regular run training. The only thing I didn't do was previously I've done, even though that's a relatively flat course, I have always done hill training. And I was not willing to test my knee by doing hill repeats. So probably if I'd been a little bit more throw caution to the wind, I could have done some hill repeats and even had a faster run, but I really didn't want to push it too hard. So it was the getting back into run training and having a new bike. And I was so excited when I saw my bike split at that race. So definitely it was a combination of healthy knees and a new bike.
Many times it's not the one thing, it's a combination of multiple things. Being able to train, have a healthy build, be able to put your best effort forth. And a nice new bike doesn't hurt the situation. So I'm glad that everything came together for you well, and you had it sounds like a much better experience this year than you did last year. Speaking of past race experiences, as we were preparing for our conversation, we happened to identify that we happened to be at the same race at the same time, but we had a very different experience with that. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. The race I'm referring to is Ironman Arizona in 2012. For me personally, I thought I had a really great day. It was my personal best Ironman triathlon distance, but I know that you had a very different experience. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about how things went for you on that day.
Absolutely. I want to preface it by saying 2012 was supposed to be my big year. I signed up for 3 iron distance races. I started Ironman St. George that year, and that was the year where we had the terrible windstorm during the swim. A lot of people were pulled from the swim. I'm normally an hour 10, depending on the course, swimmer at Ironman, and I came out in hour 45. So I got out on the bike, and biking is probably not my best discipline. And I had trained indoors because at the time I was living in Massachusetts. So I did not make the bike cutoff. So I did not finish. That was my first race that I have ever DNF'd at. I was actually okay with it because I was going to the Grand Canyon on vacation after that. So, it was like, oh, I DNF'd. Well, at least I'll have the legs for hiking.
So I don't have to run the marathon today? Like, oh, okay. Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Looking at the silver lining to that, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And then I went and did what at the time was Vineman. Now it's been changed to Ironman Santa Rosa or something like that. But Vineman, I did. My time there I was so happy with it. I'm a 12-hour, 12 and a half, depending on the course. That was a great day for me. It did really, really well. So coming into Ironman Arizona, I was super fit. And I am a really good swimmer. I enjoy swimming. I grew up swimming. I have significant confidence, probably more confidence than I should in open water swimming, but I do not fear the swim, even the mass start. So we got in the water that day at Ironman Arizona in the canal, and I was lined up near the front. The swim starts at an overpass, a bridge. And so I was just behind it. I was very much near the front in this mass start. And within seconds of the start, I could tell something was wrong. There's pillars in the water because of that overpass. So I went over to a pillar to stay out of other people's way and had a kayak come to me. And I'm like, and people being very nice and saying, are you okay? And I'm like, I can't breathe. And they thought I was anxious or I needed an inhaler. And I was, no, that's not it. I'm not anxious. I was super excited. Every time I would get horizontal to swim, I could not breathe. So over time, as I tried to not get in other people's way, I made my way over to the sidewall, and I pulled myself out of the water, and I could breathe just fine. So I said, okay, maybe it is in my head. And I get back in the water and I try to swim. I get horizontal and I couldn't breathe. And I'm a medical professional, and it was 20 minutes before I started coughing up foamy fluid, blood tinged fluid. I immediately knew I had what's called immersion pulmonary edema and that my race day was over. Of course, I went to the medical tent, but I want to give credit to the volunteers that day. I had a volunteer above me on the street and a volunteer below me in the water, making sure I was okay as I repeatedly got in and out of the water trying to swim. I, to this day, think, had I not been in that canal, if I'd been in a large open area and not able to get to something to hold on to, I think I might have drowned because my type A personality was, it's in my head. It's in my head. I've got to keep going. I've just got to push through this. And the fact that I did not have a heart attack that day, as I kept trying to force my body into a flat but endurance exercise, is to me amazing. And my personal opinion is this may be where some of the deaths in triathlon in the swim come from, is that somebody is experiencing something similar and they think, no, 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 I'm a good swimmer, or, oh, no, no, I can get through this. And really, it's something that you can't get past. It is a medical emergency, and it does require you being out of the water, unfortunately. To talk about what potentially was the cause, I do not normally drink caffeine. Just always been that way. I'm super sensitive. If I, have a cup of tea at 2 in the afternoon, I'm still awake at midnight. I just don't metabolize caffeine well. And I've always known that about myself. But my prep for the race was to have protein shakes early in the morning. And for whatever reason, that particular day, I had chosen a coffee chocolate flavored protein shake to have pre-race. So I had caffeine that day. I am not saying caffeine is the culprit. What I'm saying is the caffeine raised my blood pressure, something my body was not accustomed to. And then when I went to swim, things were not happening the way they normally do. I had noticed pre-race, like I'm usually one of those nervous line up at the porta potty, line up at the porta potty, line up at the porta potty people. I noticed I did not do that day. And I just thought, something, I must not have had enough. Now I think the whole time before the race, my body was not working properly because I'd had a large dose of caffeine that I never normally would have had. So I, to this day, still don't drink very much caffeine, and I definitely don't drink at race morning.
That is fascinating. And I know everybody's body is different. And we are by no means providing medical advice or anything like that. We're just talking about Michele's experience here and something to be aware of for athletes and triathletes in the future. So as you're looking at this now, moving forward, Michele, when you think about this, understanding your own body and how you process things, the old adage of nothing new on race day, it's just like, oh, wow. I think this might be yet another reason why we don't try new stuff on race day. Does that align for you?
100%. I definitely do not switch now. I have my nutrition. I'm very much try out that nutrition in the weeks ahead of time, especially, this upcoming season, I'm planning to switch my on course nutrition. And so I have this whole out season where I'm going to be trying different brands. It's not going to be a race day or race week switch. I'm going to try out different ones. That will never happen to me again. Hopefully, I will always try things ahead of time.
And obviously, our hearts go out to the triathletes we've lost over the years, and having whatever their experience would have been, and their families, and going through those traumatic events. Our hearts go out to them. I'm so glad that you were aware enough about your body and what was going on with you that you could pull yourself out of that and understand what was going on and realize that regardless of all the prep that you've done and prepared yourself super well, you were really excited about the day, that was just not going to be your day. And most of us would try to push through and try to make something happen. I am so glad that you were listening to your own body and live to race another day.
Absolutely. And I will also tell you that the next Ironman I did, which was the inaugural Ironman Maryland, I was so nervous for that swim. I swam literally boat to boat to boat so that I felt safe, that I knew if it happened again. I had, of course, not had caffeine, but I made sure that I was safe in the swim, that my brain was safe, that I was comfortable with the swim. And of course, I came out of it, and now I don't worry about it at all.
Well, and that's good. You've worked through that process. We've identified a likely suspect. We may never know for sure exactly what caused that series of events or what caused your medical experience there, but we've identified a likely suspect. And thus far, if you follow your protocols and follow your training program, not do anything new on race day, thus far everything's worked out. From your perspective and your training history, was there ever a turning point for you in regards to your training? And if so, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, after more than 20 years racing triathlon, I probably overdid it. I just felt like I don't want to do triathlon anymore. And so I kept my bike, put it in the garage like most people do. And I turned to CrossFit, like a lot of people have done. That it wasn't just a fad. Well, I guess it can be a fad, but my husband also was thinking about joining a CrossFit gym. So we were like, perfect timing. I'm over triathlon. He wants to do CrossFit. So we joined a CrossFit gym together and really, really enjoyed the challenge of CrossFit that we experienced getting stronger, the cardio. It was very, very different from triathlon. And I needed that mental break. That mental break lasted 2 years, I will admit. But the downside, not throwing shade at the CrossFit community, but a lot of people in the CrossFit community are like, do more, lift more. And I was very cautious, wanting to make sure I didn't get hurt. And unfortunately, I did. So I had to sort of reel back from CrossFit. And then in 2019, I just thought, I think it's time to go back to triathlon. So back I went into the triathlon world, and now I'm a little bit smarter. When I'm done with my season, I definitely take that break where I don't do any prescribed program. I will swim, I will run, I will get on my bike on a trainer, but it's nothing prescribed. It's very much fun. I do a lot more. Oh, let's try this app for a month. Let's try that app for their 30-day free trial, and just doing different things to have a completely different mindset around exercise and health, see what else is out there. But I'm going to go back to triathlon after the holidays every year. I just enjoy it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that you'd mentioned as well, and as we were working through some of this stuff earlier, that sometimes you will just look at it and say, hey, I think a long hike can be as good as a long run. Just looking for some variety and mixing things up. Do you still feel that way?
100%. I have a dog that loves to be outside, and taking my dog on a 10-mile hike instead of doing my long run for the day, it's easier on my body. I get multiple things done taking the dog out, but I just really think that we have to not be so focused on, oh, I have to get that long run in. You got to be moving. You need to take care of your brain as well as your body during your training.
And I think being able to cycle through that and being able to take a step back and look at it at those cycles year over year and say, yes, it's good to work hard and do your best and put all of your energy in, but also give yourself a mental opportunity to recover is really important. So I'm with you. If I just sat around the house watching TV all day, I'd probably go nuts. But long walks go. I'm a big fan of gravel bike riding. Is like just because I enjoy that aspect of things. When I had a similar experience where I got a little burnt out on triathlon as well. I did a bit of mountain biking and I did some gravel riding and kind of got interested in a couple of other things, a bit of trail running. Like, oh, okay. Now it's much more interesting to me to get back involved in it as opposed to, oh, it's another week of oh, here comes my Monday swim again. But now I'm more excited about taking advantage of those opportunities when I can. And you learn to appreciate that more if you are aware of what you're doing and give yourself a break. Like I said before, if you're planning on being on the top of the podium, then yeah, you're going to have to grind away for a couple of years and go for it. That's not the life I live, thankfully, for many reasons. But being able to give yourself some break times in that, and unless you are paying your mortgage or keeping food on your table by swim, bike, running, be willing to give yourself a break. I think we all put ourselves under a lot of pressure. And sometimes, like as you said, taking the long walk in the woods can be just as beneficial for you, and sometimes even more so if we include the mental component.
It's interesting. We did a vacation to Calgary last year, and we rented e-bikes and we rode e-bikes. Now, you hear e-bike, well, how much exercise you getting on an e-bike? Well, when you're riding 30 miles on an e-bike, yes, the battery lasted the whole time, but you got exercise. We rode from a town called Canmore. We rode to Banff. We went around Banff, and then we came back. So it was a long day. It was an amazing day. We stopped, we took pictures, we enjoyed the views, we, hiked a little bit. It was meant to be an enjoyable day. It was not meant to be a training day. But if you don't consider a 30-mile ride, even on an e-bike training, you got to rethink it. There's just different ways to get your exercise out.
And enjoying the world out there. That's wonderful. I've seen people out on the e-bikes, and I will admit, I'm just a little bit jealous. I I'd love to be able to just go out there like, hey, I'll go maybe a little bit faster. I'll go a little bit longer, be able to go experience something else. The mountain bike stuff, I think that's fantastic. Getting people out there that couldn't otherwise experience that environment. When they first came out, I was the first to throw shade on those guys. Like, hey, who's this knucklehead, kind of going up the mountain this way? Like, what's going on? That's a cheater. But now I look at it like, if that person hadn't had that e-bike, maybe they'd have been the ones sitting at home watching TV all day. So good for them. Get an e-bike or whatever it takes. Get out, enjoy the world, be active. I'm all for it. I've gotten over my previous bias against e-bikes and now I'm a big fan. At this point, I just need to talk my wife into it. My stable of bikes is pretty full at the moment.
I hate to admit it, but I commute by e-bike. So I do have an e-bike as well as a tri-bike, as well as a road bike, as well as a mountain bike.
Yes, yes, okay. Yes, that struggle is real. So,
Yes.
well, I'll keep working on that. I'll let you know if I make any progress on my end. Okay, so also wanted to just kind of check in. I know we're running a little bit short on time for today's conversation. Also wanted to check in about kind of the race landscape ahead for you. If you have anything big coming up, races that you're looking at this point.
Actually, I feel like it just passed. Originally, I was slated to do Ironman Augusta 70.3, which of course was canceled because of the hurricanes, and rightfully so. The damage was pretty extensive here in Georgia, and heart really goes out to those communities that suffered with the hurricane damage, and I hope that they are continuing to recover. So, of course, I pivoted to the Edisto triathlon, which was not on my original plan, but was well worth the extra 4-week wait that went into it. So at this point, it's beginning of November. I'm done with my season, and I am taking the break that I need in order to recoup and have a great season next year.
Wonderful. I hope you enjoy your break. I hope you enjoy your downtime. If you only had $100 to spend on triathlon gear, what is it that you would buy?
I think nutrition is so important to triathlon race success. I think if you underfuel, you don't have a good day. If you overfuel, you end up with gut issues. It's important to know what you can tolerate, how much you can tolerate. What works for me may not be palatable to you. It might have worked for you, but you might hate the taste of it. So it's important to go out there and look at and sample different nutrition elements that are out there, whether that be chews, the liquid nutrition, bars, squares. There's so much out there in the triathlon landscape. You have to look at what you can tolerate. Are you okay with more chemicals? I hate to put it that way, but more things that you don't know what it is in the bar versus a very simple bar versus something maybe you even make at home out of some simple ingredients. There's a lot to the nutrition. You could read a ton of stuff. If you find something that you tolerate, that suits your palate, if it's a little bit more on the expensive side, it's still going to be worth your money because nutrition can break your day sometimes.
Absolutely agree with that. Now, I'm not an expert on the nutrition side of things, but I have heard that and we're not sponsored by anybody, so we're all clear, or at least I'm not. So I've heard about a service or a company. It's called The Feed. They allow for individuals to essentially do sample packs and say, hey, I don't necessarily want to buy the 94 pack of that gel that I've never tried, but you can buy one-off packets. And if I've got all that wrong, I hope somebody in the community will let me know and tell us, oh no, it's a different company or whatever. But I believe it was The Feed. And then that way you could say, hey, I've heard good things about this gel. I want to try a few of them and not have to break the bank on a bunch of stuff that, maybe it turns out it might work, but I can't stand the taste of. And there's a lot of stuff out there. So I'm a big fan of sampling. That's part of the reason why pretty much most of the races I go to, I end up with a couple extra whatevers. So I don't try them on race day. I follow my own rules. I don't try them on race day, but I'll stuff them in my pockets or I'll leave them in my transition bags and say, oh, okay, great. I'm going to try that on a long training ride and see how that settles for me. Everybody's different. So we've got to find our own things. I have also heard that some people are really diligent about whatever is going to be served on the race course. I'm going to force my body to figure out how to process whatever it is that's on the race course. And I feel for those people and I wish them the best. In my opinion, I think it's much better for you to work with the things that work with your body rather than trying to make your body work with whatever's out there. That just sounds like torturous to me. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, because as I've said all along, I don't drink caffeine, but what's on the race courses? Coca-Cola or some kind of cola soda. And that is the time that I drink Coca-Cola during the event. It does for me settle my stomach as it does for a lot of people. And the little jolt of caffeine, because it's not that much, helps. So yeah, I mean, on those rare occasions where you might go to a sporting event, you're going to drink a soda. So I don't consider it a new thing for me to be drinking it. Also, the cups are so small, it's not like I'm chugging a 16-ounce bottle. So I will have a little bit of Red Bull. Some courses have had Red Bull this year. I always have a little bit of cola. And, we've all drank Gatorade at some point in our lives, unless you absolutely can't stand the flavor. Lemon lime, anybody? There's actually an orange mango that's really good. Do I train with Gatorade? No, I don't, because I think I would get sick of it. But I do utilize on the run course only. Do I take the little bits of other things that I know I've had that don't upset my stomach? And I think that that's totally fine. But I would not be out there grabbing brand new gels or shot blocks. Or excuse me, that's a brand. I apologize. Different types of gelatins that you can chew. I wouldn't be out there trying new ones on race day. That's too much nutrition at that point.
I think we're on the same page with that. I've even heard some, I would say, legend-esque stories of professionals who are sponsored by particular companies saying, "Yes, I have that name on my water bottle. I am not going to tell you what's inside the water bottle." So recognizing that you need to understand what works for your body, even if somebody's helping you pay the mortgage, you still need to make sure that you are paying attention to what works for you and minimize trying new stuff on race day, even if I end up with my race day pockets stuffed full of freebies that I get to sample with later. There was one other bit that I just wanted to open up to you. Was there anything, Michele, from your experience that you'd like for the community to know about your journey and how you've progressed through triathlon?
When I started in triathlon, I didn't have a coach, I didn't have a training regimen. I just did what felt good that day. As the years have progressed, of course, I've had coaches, I've purchased online plans. There's no perfect. It's what works for you. And I refuse to think that I have to if I could just find the perfect plan, I'm sure I could reach the top of the podium. It's not in my genetics, it's not in my genes that I'm going to be at the top of the podium. So I'm not searching for perfect. I'm searching for what keeps me interested, what keeps me going, what has me enjoying triathlon. And even then, when I think I have a really great progression going, sometimes I have to spend extra time at work or I have to go in early or I didn't really sleep that well last night for some reason. Maybe I'm worried about my dog being sick. And in the moment, I have to adjust. If I have to skip my training that day, I do, but I always make time. And I think this is really important. You always really need to make time for strength training. This year, I think I did that the best that I have ever done it. And the payoff was during the Edisto triathlon where I was in aero 99% of the time, I would say, because it was on an island and it was flat. I did not have shoulder pain and I did not have back pain. Two things that I normally get if I don't get those aero breaks for climbing a hill. And I was really pleased that I could tell my strength training had paid off this year. So I do it twice a week, 20 minutes. I do my strength training the way I do my cardio. It's like, no, just go, go, go. Bicep, tricep, chest, back. I am constantly moving during my strength training. I am not taking those long pauses that some people tend to think they need to take during strength training. You don't. You can do your strength training, do a really good job, and really reap the benefits.
And you don't have to be moving massive weights in doing that sort of thing, but you're working your body a little bit differently, building more muscle, more strength in those areas. Also helps a lot of the supportive muscle groups, your shoulders and your back when you're in aero and all of those things. So I appreciate you sharing that. I know I am guilty of skipping out on core workout more than I would like to admit. I know that I race a lot better when I am consistent with it. It just happens to be at the bottom of a very long list of things that go on. So I'll tell you my tip or trick here. When I was doing it most consistently was when I would do my core work when my family and I were watching TV at night. So we would be winding down from the day. We'd be watching a show with the kiddos on the sofa, and I would hop down on the floor and I'd do my planks and my crunches and do all my stretching stuff. And I was still able to spend quality time with the family, and I was making my own body better while I was doing that. Even saying it out loud, I can't tell you the last time I did it. Who knows? Maybe this will give me my own kick in the rear to get back out there and do the things that I know I need to be doing to make myself better by sharing it with the group. So my own little group therapy session here. So thank you all for listening. It has been a pleasure, Michele. I very much appreciate you setting aside your time, sharing with us your experiences, the journey that you've had through triathlon. Wish you all of the best in your future endeavors, and look forward to seeing you at the start line in some race someday. So thanks again.
Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Michele Cellai for coming on the show. I really appreciate you, Michele, for sharing your story and your experience. I hope that you sharing your story will help improve our community, and in this case, might actually save a life. We will be including in the show notes links to the local races that Michele had mentioned. So if you'd like to look for some other options outside of the MDOT branded races to test yourself and find a couple of options in the Georgia area, you can find those in the show notes. I hope this episode of Money Mile was valuable for you. If it was, please share this podcast with your training buddies and friends. Keep in mind that if you work out, everything else will too. And we look forward to talking with you next time on Money Mile.